Hello, everybody. Unfortunate. I'm not very fond of Italian. So let's talk about what measuring what matters. And in that context, so this way. In that context, I'm going to try and focus on observing things that really, really matter to the business. We're always very familiar with measuring things that are very technical, but very often those things don't really benefit the business. So I'm Leslie Forbes. I am with Axonius, a software company that's based in the States. And we have got several people across the world looking after our customers and working with our partners. So this is a bit of a background for the last, 25 years, I suppose. Starting as a systems engineer, working all the way through on the engineering front. We're currently with partners. So let's try and understand where we're going today. So we plan to cover a couple of topics, including a bit of an introduction to what's been going on in the industry, what people are spending money on, and then try and have a look at how value is showcased, the cybersecurity value is showcased in other business units, and then a look at how we can up-level our own secure cybersecurity program. And then a quick look at the metrics that we can measure with Axonius, and that's not limited, by the way. So I'll make that point out clear. So let's have a look. Let's start with the state of cybersecurity spending and planning, because it always is planned way in advance. Oh, we don't have budget right now. So where we are, the approach that we see many companies taking today is one where there's more of a focus on quantity over quality. So there are far more tools than what there are outcomes. But really where we want to be is in a place where there is far more quality than there is quantity. So the problem with lots of tools is that onboarding takes a long time. Security teams are very stretched, so they find it very difficult to keep engaged and up to scratch with all of their security tools. And the third thing is that there's a lot of noise. Tools are very well known for making lots of alerts. So if you've got more tools than what you really need, you're going to have more alerts than what you really need. So that's kind of why we're pointing out that we should really have fewer tools, but focus on the quality of outcomes of each of those tools in order to make our cybersecurity program very efficient. So it is 2025. Nothing has changed on the cybersecurity threat front. In fact, actors are more engaged than ever, and they're benefiting from all of the delays that businesses take in defining their risk strategy, if you could call it that. So the problem is that we need to elevate security so that it's not just a technical problem, but it's a business problem. And what we're trying to say here is we need to get a really good strategy or a really good definition, I suppose you would call it, for what risk tolerance actually is in the business. Because that's all that the board really ever are concerned about, is how much risk are we prepared to accept. So one of the reasons that cybersecurity teams have got difficulty showing the value that they get or that they deliver is because there isn't a very clear organizational, definition for what cybersecurity risk actually is, and therefore how they can measure it and how they can define it. So this brings us a little closer to where we're going today with this discussion on how to define cybersecurity metrics. And I'm not going to say that there's only one type of metric or that there's 10 types of metrics or anything. I want to illustrate how we can balance these things out. So it's really a balance. a balance between how much do we want to spend and how much risk do we want to accept. That's really what this thing is fundamentally all about, and why we need representation on the board of businesses in order to make that representation for investment. So, how much money we're going to spend is going to drive the overall strategy for cybersecurity planning. So, with that background, let's talk about the different steps that we recommend to demonstrate the value of our cybersecurity projects to the business, to leadership, and ultimately to the board. So most of us have been in this situation, I think, of trying to understand what it is that leadership actually want from us. Why do they want it? And the fact that we haven't been measuring what they want is normally part of the problem. So we've been measuring one thing, but the leaders want something different. So, very often where there's no clarity, then there are gaps in what we can report. So, more importantly, we need to ensure that the whole team understands what we're measuring and why. Why are we capturing all of these metrics? What's the business relevance of these metrics? So, here's the interesting. Actually, I didn't fill the slide that way, but anyway, it'll work. We should be looking at the way that boards really talk about these things. Our boards really are interested in three things. And these three things often cause, would you say, misalignment between the technical folks and the business folks. It's not surprising. It's not surprising at all. But more and more, we've seen organizations adopting a good starts towards cybersecurity. So they've got CISOs on their board, or they've got representation from the CISO on their board. And this is a really good thing. However, the problem is that when CISOs bring technical jargon into the boardroom, that's when people's eyes glaze over and they kind of lose focus and can't concentrate on what it is that's being discussed. So what we need is to constantly bring back this conversation to, how are we securing against any cyber threats? What are we doing that keeps us ahead of all of our peers in the industry that we operate in? And do we have a model that operates and brings us any financial strain or any difficulty with the objectives of the business, which is very clearly to make money? So the way that we can do this to demonstrate the importance of cybersecurity to the business in non-technical terms. So we already know that security is not a technical problem alone. It is a business problem fundamentally because it costs money, right? And it's supposed to be a business enabler. But if we're coming in to the boardroom with conversations like we're seeing on the right side, when it's just technical speak, doesn't make a lot of sense to the guys in the boardroom. Really, what we should be doing is positioning our objectives and even the failures. So we've missed a compliance target. We should be saying, well, we failed our compliance target because of X. Maybe we didn't do some level of investment in Mimecast or whatever it is. So the point is, we don't want to be talking about what they call speeds and fees. If we don't have fast enough internet, or we don't have this, or we don't have that. It's all about it's about framing the discussion in a business context. So the starting point for this is very often trying to build what we'd call it, a risk framework. The point is that all of these kind of, what would you say, threat actors, sophisticated threat actors, they don't have just a raw approach to who they're going to target. They target specific people. They've got very, very specific plans to attack certain people in the business. So this is why we're talking about C-level versus customer success. The C-level people, they have access to pretty much everything in the business. And why business email compromise is a very hot topic. Because they can just push a button and money flows, right? So they've got access to all those kind of things. Now, why is security up on that chart at the top there as well? Because they don't have the ability to spend money. No, they don't. But the security guys, they have got access to all of the systems that they're monitoring and controlling and driving and so on. So that's kind of why this, the level of risk is high for a security person versus a customer success or a marketing person. But anyway, this is just kind of a sample approach to how we measure the risk in the business before we define a practical way of how we do it. So this is kind of like the next stage. So after we've looked at where's the risk actually floating, now we want to start looking at where are we going to start measuring things, and we're trying to draw out 3 different approaches to measuring. KPIs are a well-known thing. Key performance indicators. They're well known, and they're very sort of common to most businesses. They just measure strategic business objectives typically. Can we improve this or can we do that? And what are we actually doing about it? Very often just counts money or counts things. Maybe cybersecurity spend or how much training have we done? So I keep thinking, it's funny, intentional. Moving towards the right, where we're trying to get more context into these metrics. We're talking about key risk indicators. Some of the words. Where is there something that's going wrong? Can we measure that? So a typical key risk indicator in the sales organization is how many sales have been made and is our sales volume dropping? That's a key risk indicator in the sales org. So the same way we can have that in the cyberspace. The number of vulnerabilities that are failing patching over a period of time. Or perhaps business units that haven't done their patching as opposed to other business units that have done their patching. So all of those are key risk indicators. So there's typically a response that comes out of a key risk indicator. If it's dropping down, we want to kind of have some remedial action. Now, the most important one of all of these is a relatively new one called a key control indicators. Now, what's cool about key control indicators is that they are based on a base metric, if you want to call it that. So in simple terms, we would want to have a very clearly defined number of assets. So how many of our assets are covered by endpoint security or EDR? Or what percentage of vulnerabilities are being patched in 30 days? So those are they're a baseline metric and define or show that the controls that we have in place or the controls that are defined in our cybersecurity policy are actually working. So those are really, really powerful ways of putting measurements out on a chart. So here's another way of looking at this. This is almost akin to the Gartner cybersecurity business value framework, I think they call it. I've grouped these things together so that we can look at ways of defining rates of patching. How many operating system do we have at our end of life? What percentage of all of those workstations that we have are end of life? Windows 10, for example. And then when you start talking about coverage, I talked about gaps in the previous slide. What percentage of our estate actually have working endpoint protection on it? What percentage have functional backups, which are end of life again? When we start talking about identities, can we measure how many users are actually using our MFA product? But not even Okta can do that, by the way. So these are things that need to be focused on and that are very insanely difficult usually to measure. So how do we upscale our cybersecurity program? Let's take a look at some of the operational processes that we need to be focusing on in order to try and improve, what it is that we're presenting as business value to the business. Now, this is probably nothing new to anyone. People, processes, technology, and the sort of maturity curve, if you want to call it that. So towards the right-hand side is where we're aiming. We want to be able to have, as robust a policy or process as possible, so that when things happen, people just know instinctively, what to do. That's what, security processes are there for, rather than just say, you've got the ETR. When things really happen, like CrowdStrike happened here, people are caught unawares and don't know quite what to do. There's no process. So that's really what maturity is all about. Anyway, that's kind of really an important aspect to having things in place to define what it is that we do, and be efficient about what it is that we do. So we already talked about building these metrics and putting context around it. Key control indicators versus key performance indicators. That's a level of context that we're adding in there. Now, when it comes to measuring risk, do we have the right context around the risk that we have? So sometimes it's, maybe we'll have a breach or something. But if we've got a key control indicator revolving around our security program, then we're able to measure the effect of a lapse in security, for example. So those are different things that we can bring into play when it is that the board is saying, well, if we invest €1 million here, how much is that going to improve the overall control that we have over our cybersecurity risk? How much difference is it going to make? So let's talk very, very quickly. And with that as the backdrop, about how Axonius brings to the party capabilities that have never been seen before, generally, to try and upscale this measurement game. So, sorry. So, in this context is this concept of an attack surface. Most people are familiar with the attack surface, and there are lots of vendors that are talking about attack surface management and so on. That's where I'm coming from. So, right on the very left-hand side are the things that we typically control. So maybe Active Directory or Entra ID and all those kind of things. How about the things that you don't control? Bring your own device, maybe. How about the things right in the middle, which are things that we don't control typically, but we should? Bring your own device, again, fits into that category. So how do we do this? Our platform is built on the strategy to bring truth to action. So in other words, make action out of the truth that we've got. The way that we do this is by building a very clear picture of assets. Lots and lots of different categories of assets. There are more than 30 of these categories. Devices, identities, applications, software, infrastructure, vulnerabilities, users, all those kind of things are assets in our world. And we want to collect all of them. And using this adapter stack that's in the middle there, we fetch all of this information from those tools, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute, and use that data to drive enforcements. Now, enforcements are things that you might want to change as a result of finding gaps or identifying where things are not up to snuff. So there are more than 1,000 of these, what we call adapters or integrations or API connections. And this is how we do it. So these three pillars are the sort of building blocks for pretty much every single use case that Axonius has. We collect all of this asset data, well, it's metadata really, I suppose, from hundreds of all of these different tools that are already chosen by organizations. Most organizations have tools for a reason, right? They've got their CrowdStrike, they've got their Silence, they've got their SentinelOne, they've got their Entra ID, they've Druva backup. All of those tools are there for a reason. So we're not here to replace those tools. We're here to aggregate all data from those tools to help manage and visualize and draw data, measurements, metrics from them to build very clear pictures of the progress that we try to make in this journey. So we then use that data to build queries that show where there are gaps, and then do something about it. So there's going to be some remediation strategy, some kind of mobilization strategy, some kind of continuous process for dealing with whatever is missing out of those gaps. So it starts with this, right? The advantage that we have is that we've got a data foundation, or a data fabric, I suppose you call it. And we want to just spend a minute just taking a look at what it is that we're doing here. So we're aggregating all of the data from all of these different tools that I've just mentioned. And then we correlate that data. So there's normalization that takes place. And then we correlate the data so that every single asset, whether it's a vulnerability or a computer or a workstation or a virtual machine or a serverless function or whatever it is, there is some kind of association with typically more than one source. So we can draw that correlation. There's enrichment that takes place. So it could be vulnerability enrichment. It could be enrichment with other data from Showdown, or it could be enrichment from sensors. Any one of these kind of tools where you can add additional data or layer additional data over existing data for an asset. Then we draw, relationships, if you want to call it that, between, for example, a user and a laptop, or a laptop and vulnerabilities, or laptop and installed software, or all of those kind of things are relationships, and they all benefit in the long run to determine, for example, an attack path. Where is this thing most likely to attack? If a person's account has been compromised, where is it likely to be used? We can then do assessments. Like I said, find gaps, ask questions, inclusive and exclusive questions. And then, most importantly, visualize all these things. This is where I was headed with that original slide. Say, we need to have these pieces of information in order to build percentage-based metrics or improvement metrics. If you've got the baseline, then you can do all manner of things. But if you don't have a very clear baseline, it's almost impossible to do all these definitions. With that in place, we then can multiply that outcome with continuous actionability. So what does that actually mean? So we can optimize and accelerate and prioritize. Prioritize, that's a nice word. People are struggling with all of this vulnerability stuff. How do we prioritize on vulnerabilities? All of these are mechanisms that are really, really crucial to making a data set work for you, and then constantly verify what the outcome is on the back of that. So this is the way it works. So we talked originally about things you control, and the things you don't control, and the things which we should control. All of those are typically brought in as sources of data from all of these adapters. There are all the adapters that we're talking about. That's just a sample of the 1,000 or so adapters that we have. We then overlay that with a discovery process. Call it triangulation. You've seen in the movies how they've said, we can find out exactly where that mobile phone is. Well, we can find out exactly where a device is based on all of the different sources. And I'm not talking about physically where it is. The fact that it exists is what I'm talking about. So there, bring all these things in. What are the things that we can control? So typical stuff that you find in VMware or Azure or AWS or Entra ID, Active Directory, all the classic things which are definitive in their sorts. What sort of things do we not control? Zoom. Very often, people can install Zoom on their phone, and engage in a corporate meeting. Wouldn't that be nice to know that somebody's used their phone in order to perform corporate meetings? Well, that sort of thing can be done with all of that relationship stuff that I was talking about earlier on. What about the things that we don't control but we should? Maybe like Expensify, where things show up as certain expenses, maybe IT charges that have been set in by somebody using their credit card. maybe an AWS account. Those are problems, right? So how do we look at this from a customer's point of view? These are the typical, what should we call them, organizational divides that we have. Yeah, there's the security, there's the IT, there's the governance people. Let's try and focus just on security just for a minute and see what it is that organizations can benefit in the typical types of projects that they're busy with. So those three at the bottom: manage and optimize assets, remediate security vulnerabilities, and so on. Let's take a look at those and just try and see what it is that we can provide as output. So I'm running a tiny bit behind here. So this is the basis. From all of that metadata that we've been talking about, we can show distinctly, how compliant we are with certain measurements. How many of our Windows workstations are protected by McAfee or by whatever tool it is that's of interest. It might even just be MECF or SCCF management consoles. All of those are mechanisms that help to reduce the overall time that is spent in dealing with all of these problems. CMDB reconciliation is another classic one which helps to remove the amount of time that it takes to build a very good inventory of things. Then I talked about prioritization just a minute ago, but if we were able to show how to focus remediation efforts for patching vulnerabilities, that would be a win for everybody, because it means that we're getting it patched much quicker and therefore enhancing the cybersecurity status of our business. And similarly, with all of the data that we've collected from all of these tools, and like I said, all of this stuff gets overlaid over one another and enriched from additional sources. When an event happens, and events are typically terrible, say IP logged into machine X, that's not really healthy. But when you can go and query Axonius and say, tell me everything you know about IP or Joey, the user, whatever it is, when you can bring context to something, then there's so much more value and so much more efficiency, because you could simply say, hey, what's behind this IP address? And in seconds, you can get an answer with dozens and dozens and dozens of fields. So those are three, very kind of classic use cases that I've just demonstrated there. But of course, there are plenty more use cases that we could talk about in the IT context and in the governance, risk, and compliance context. And these are just kind of very typical, simplistic ways of reviewing the projects that are typically engaging by businesses. So if there are any questions, I'm happy to take questions. I know we've run out of time just a little bit, so I'm sorry if I called you up. There